Welcome to the best fantasy basketball podcast on the internet. I'm your host, Kenyon Browning, and this week on the show, we've made a few changes. New name, new logo design, and we rewrote the entire approach to the show. All right, guys, I know it's a lot of change, but here's what you can expect going forward. So instead of one long podcast every week, we're going to do 4 shorter episodes. Each episode is going to be 20 to 30 minutes in length. So hopefully it fits into your drive to work or your drive home from work, or maybe if you just take a really long dump. Each episode is going to follow the same theme. So if you have some content that you like, you can just listen to that episode every week. And if you feel like broadening it out, great. The first episode each week is going to focus on setting your lineup. We're going to dive into that 8 through 13 spot on your roster. We're going to try to find gems that you should be starting every week. We're also going to try to find duds that really should be riding the bench. This episode is going to be focused solely on player performance discussion. So if that's not your jam, that's okay. Skip it. There's plenty more content coming throughout the week. However, if you find yourself struggling with setting your lineup every week and you want some pointers, listen in on Mondays or Tuesdays, and we'll offer you our best advice on how to get value or how to avoid tragedy when you set your lineup on Mondays. The second episode is going to be a top 10. As we talked about it, all 3 of us love ranking things. We also like arguing with each other. So we're going to put together our best top 10 of whatever the topic is, and then we're going to discuss our rankings live on the podcast. If you like listening to us trash talk each other, argue, or if you really just like the banter, this is a great episode to catch every week. We're going to post it on Wednesdays or Thursdays. And each week, we're just going to take a top 10 of really whatever we feel like. The third episode each week is really intended to be more educational. We're going to be focusing more on concepts than players in this episode. And we'll pick topics that help you become better owners and better fantasy managers overall. One week, we may cover how to sell high on a trade without pissing off all the other owners, or how to evaluate your rookies in a dynasty league as opposed to a redraft league. If you're looking to learn more about fantasy basketball, about how to play it, and how to evaluate players, but you really don't want to listen to us talk about individual players or individual performance, this might be a good episode to check out. We're looking to release probably on a Friday or a Saturday. Might be good weekend content while you're, I don't know what you guys do on the weekend, but whatever you do. The last episode each week is really going to be focused on waiver wire pickups. The plan is that we release this episode on Saturday or Sunday. And hopefully this coincides nicely with the new waiver wire rules that I've set up. So for those of you who don't monitor the league announcements channel, I've moved up to only 2 waiver clearance times during the week. The first waiver clearance time is going to be on Sundays at 3 p.m. Central. The idea here is that you get the whole week to put your bids in, look over the players list, review different players and see how their performance is changing. And then on Sunday at 3 p.m., you find out if you got the guy you bid on. If you didn't and you have somebody injured you want to drop or somebody that you want to replace on your roster, that's okay. Monday, there's another window at 3 p.m. where you can make sure you get a new player before roster's locked for the week. Again, if you're stressing over who to pick up, tune in on Sunday and we'll give you our best waiver wire finds to round out your dynasty roster. And that's it for now. Guys, we know there's been a lot of change. We hope these changes make the content we're making more accessible and more helpful. If not, we'll continue to adapt. One last thing before we start the episode. Please remember this podcast is for you. Give us your feedback on what's working and what isn't. Leave a comment, message me on Instagram, or just drop me a text. My door is literally always open. All right, that's really it. Now let's get into it. Welcome to the best fantasy basketball podcast on the internet. I'm your host, Kenyon Browning. These are my co-hosts, David Haker and Josh Browning. And today we're going to be talking about waiver wire pickups.
Real quick, Kenyon, would you say this podcast is the best that ever has been or ever will be?
I would say that is the best podcast ever, actually.
I like that even more.
So this week, today we're going to be talking about waiver wire pickups, guys. And we're really just going to be focusing on guys that you can add to your Dynasty roster, guys that we personally are fans of or that we think should be on rosters already. I will say, looking out there across the rosters, guys, there's some garbage out there that's on rosters that needs to get cleaned up. If a guy is not averaging over 10 fantasy points per game, time to kick him. If he's not like a
especially if he's over 35.
Yeah, if he's if he's
35 in fantasy years is like 15 in dog years. Like, just get rid of it.
And in fact,
Move
actually,
on.
what we're recommending is just take him out back and shoot him. Is really what David's trying to say. But there's some trash out there.
All animal
Joe
lovers.
Eagles.
That's true.
We just lost all animal lovers.
So these are some guys. Each of us have picked two guys from the waiver wire who we're hot on, who we think should be on a dynasty roster today. Not all of them are young guys, but they may be win now prospects. Some of them are stash and hold guys. Who do we want to start with? Do we want to start with some stash and hold, or we want to start with somebody who can impact your roster right now?
Let's start with the latter.
Okay. Impacting your roster right now, I got one. JaVale McGee. All right. Mr. Tragic Bronson, for anybody who's a fan of the old Shaq and a Fool series.
Heck yeah, block his own shot.
This man was for years a tragic mess of an NBA player, but has actually turned into a solid role player in the latter half of his career. He's playing for Phoenix. Big reason why he should be on a roster. Frank Kaminsky, the other backup center for Phoenix, just, I think, injured his meniscus and is out for the rest of the season or something like that.
So I don't know if it's meniscus, but yeah.
I know he's out for the rest of the season because I had him on my roster for all of like 6 days. And, DeAndre Ayton is unvaccinated and, likely is going to have some issues here and there with it being on the court.
I did not know that.
And look, I think overall we saw problems in the playoffs late last year where Phoenix really struggled with backup center and center minutes when Ayton couldn't play 48 minutes a game. And quite frankly, JaVale McGee's averaging 21 fantasy points a game. I see no reason why this guy is not on a roster today. If you have a guy who's 32 plus years old, who's averaging under 20 fantasy points per game, ditch him and get JaVale McGee. He's a boss and he's going to continue to perform.
Ooh, a boss. Now we're going a little too far. He will make a highlight reel, but it might not be for the right reasons.
That's okay. Highlight reels don't score fantasy points, guys.
That's true. I was going to say, even back in those days, tragic Brunson days, he was like a top 50 player because he'd average 3.5 blocks a game because he went for literally every shot.
Yeah. When he was at Denver, when I was younger, I watched those Acton Fools. I was like, this guy's garbage. And then I actually went back and looked at his stats back then, and I was like, this guy's actually pretty good.
Pretty decent.
And then at Golden State, didn't he win a championship with them? So
he did.
And with LA, he was the backup center for that LA, the Astros season with the bubble season.
Whoa.
Nice. Astros. What do you mean? LA deserved that.
Astros, because it was actually the toughest championship.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, where they had to be socially separated for 3 months. This is like, you ever seen
No
that
fans.
Rocket Man where the dude had to isolate himself in the chamber for a week, and it drove the person in the chamber next to him insane because he was fine and he just sang? That's what it was like. And LeBron just drove everyone else insane. He sang the whole time in the bubble. Anyway, let's move on. Another guy.
this in on the best fantasy
that ever has been or
nobody
ever will be ever.
So we don't have a ton of other guys on the list. I guess, Josh, you had kind of the second oldest guy on our waiver wire pickups list, Cameron Johnson. I know he is still, I think, a third-year player, but he's 26 or 27, something like that. 25. Okay, so he's not that old. Make your case. Why should Cameron Johnson be on a dynasty roster?
But take a drink of wine first, Josh.
I will do that. I'll take another one just for good measure.
This is gonna sound great.
Okay, for those of you who are listening to this podcast,
enjoy
podcast. Yes. Please enjoy the sound of my silky voice as I tell you about Cameron Johnson.
Oh my God.
Cameron Johnson is not only an amazing swingman. He's not even a
he swings.
He's not even a swingman. He's a small forward / power forward. No, actually, Cameron Johnson. I think just like one of the things when you're looking into with these younger guys is how many minutes are they getting playing. And I think when you're looking, especially with the waiver wire pickups, Cameron Johnson is like, he versus San Antonio or not San Antonio. What is it? Versus the last people that they played, where Phoenix beat them by a couple points. He only had like 9 fantasy points.
It was Denver. They played San Antonio last, and they played Denver before that.
That's what it was. It was San Antonio. That's what I meant. He only had a little bit before then. But for Denver, he had about 37 points, 20 points, 17 points going down the line. And he's pretty much average in the low to mid fantasy points. That coupled with the fact that he's getting very consistent minutes around the 22 mark on a very good Phoenix Suns team. Like, I feel like maybe not now, but he's one of those guys that you could stash him on your lineup and still get a couple good games out of him because he's going to get you plus 20 points potentially on a night. And he's been consistent enough other than the last game with San Antonio of getting you in the double digits. So he's not going to bust on you at all. So that's my take on him.
I think he's also kind of in a unique position where he's sort of inheriting the role from who's the guy ahead of him? Dreadlocks.
Jay Crowder.
Jay Crowder.
Jay
Crowder's getting older. Yes, Devin Booker. He's inheriting that role. Jay Crowder is getting older, and Phoenix kind of has been pushing Cameron Johnson along to overtake that role eventually. He's also going into a contract year, so Phoenix is in a position where they want to get this guy minutes, either to see what he's capable of to know if they should pay him, or B, jack up his stats if they don't like him to be able to trade him somewhere. So I think he's in a really good position this season. And then also he's only 25, so he should get better in future seasons as well.
Yeah, I'm a big measurables guy. I like size. I like length. One of the things I love about Cameron Johnson.
Yeah, you do.
He's I didn't really realize how that would sound until it came out of my mouth. So we're just gonna
we know it.
We're gonna walk on past that one. So Cameron Johnson, he's just a big dude. Like I think he's 6'8", something like that.
Yeah,
I think he has like a 7-foot wingspan. He's talented. He played good minutes in the playoffs. I always like seeing how guys perform in the playoffs. He was a good rotation player in the playoffs. And to David's point, as he's coming up on a contract year, I mean, like he's going to get minutes so that they can pump him up. And I mean, best case for him fantasy wise, he goes to a different team, right? I mean, he's good on Phoenix. Like I think
OKC.
If he goes to an actual, like a team where he can actually have a major role, he could be a high 20s, low 30s guy. So I'm definitely a Cameron Johnson supporter. In the spirit of Josh's picks, Josh, who is your second guy you're recommending to pick up this week?
I am going to butcher his name, but Denny Aviga.
Do not lose his country's subscribers.
Denny Aviga.
Advija. That was pretty good. Advija.
Is it? I need to look up the names. Yeah, he's basically
he's from
young,
Israel anyway, so not that many people there.
Yeah, so if we hadn't lost those people, we just did by that comment. So
hey, come on back, Palestine supporters.
Yes,
we love Palestine.
Don't worry about it. We've got it.
Oh, we're solving.
Remember the way I pronounce his name, Avija? Like I feel like that's going to give us some brownie points.
I was right. He's Israeli. All right. Cool.
All right, cool. We confirmed that we just insulted an entire country. Awesome. Yeah, so for this guy, the Israeli, as we're going to from here
What's
on,
his name?
Denny Aviga.
All right, I'll take it.
I'm gonna just call him the Israeli. Yeah, he's young, so he's only 20 years old. So in fantasy basketball leagues, if you're just in a redraft league, yeah, that might not be that big of a deal. But for dynasty leagues, if you want to pick up somebody who's going to get you points this year, and give you longevity, like getting into it, he's very early into his career. He gets minutes too. 21.2 points or 21.2 minutes per game. That's pretty fantastic for somebody who's in his 20s. And then the last month, he's put up numbers like 39 fantasy points, 24 fantasy points, 26. That's all pretty good numbers for somebody who's in his 20s, gets you 21 minutes per game. I say he's not only one of the better guys that I've seen, like just in general in the league, but for some reason he's way down in the waiver wire pickups. So you have to actually go and search for him, which escapes me of why that's the case. So great pickup for any real league if you're in a deep league, but amazing pickup if you're in a dynasty league like ours and you've got like 14 plus teams.
Full disclosure on him. I have him on my watch list as well, so I agree with a lot of your points.
I'll second that. He's also on my watch list.
Josh, you made such a good point by saying that. I literally just went to the waivers and picked him up.
Star Denny Avdija.
He's
Israeli. Star.
No, I completely agree. David, you were about to say something about him though. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say the only reason I haven't picked him up at this point were just some concerns that I've had, which are he's playing a position in Washington that they have a couple injuries in right now. So I wonder how his role is going to play out once like Rui Hashimura comes back. I want to see if that eats into his minutes at all. But I'm only in that position because I have other draft and stash players on my team. If I was another team that had a 35-year-old 15 fantasy points per game guy, I would totally drop him to pick this guy up just to see what happens and maybe even write it into next year, see if his role grows next year.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I'll be honest, I watch a decent amount of Washington games. I have Dinwiddie on my team, and I kind of just wanted to see like what the heck was going on when they started so well. I started watching them after they started out the season so well.
You're a masochist?
Denny is a good player too. Like he makes good decisions. He's a good passer. He's not the greatest shooter, but he'll get better. And I think maybe the best point that Josh made is he's 20 years old. He's a sophomore and he's getting minutes on a good team. Like that's a good sign. And you get huge leaps in fantasy performance from years 2 to 3 and 3 to 4. So like, this is a guy who, yes, you stash, like David said, kick that dude who's 33 on your team and who's getting 14 to 18 fantasy points per game. Pick up a dude who's 20 years old and who next season could easily average in the low 30s.
Take him out back, put him behind the shed, and tie him up.
Take care. Yeah.
Good.
15-year-old dog, as David said. He's a 15-year-old dog.
So this is good. We've alienated all animal lovers, all Israelis, and likely all Palestinians while we've been at this. So, Dave, I know you have another kind of one I would call a heavy draft and stash, and the other one is probably more of a contributor these days. Let's hit your draft and stash option first.
Sure. So draft and stash. Honestly, I feel like both my guys are kind of draft and stash. More so probably Obi Toppin. He's a guy who's getting, what is he getting? About 15 minutes a game, maybe 20.
I think
he's playing on
15.
15. He's on the New York Knicks, which they're coached by Tom Thibodeau. For those of y'all that don't know, Tom Thibodeau plays his starters outrageous minutes. So most bench guys don't get to see the light of day, and Obi Toppin's no exception. The only reason I'm interested in this guy, though, is even in his 15 minutes of time, he's still getting about 20 fantasy points per game. He seems to have a well-rounded fantasy game as well, which tells me that if something happens, like Julius Randle gets injured or RJ Barrett gets injured or something, and minutes open up for him, he starts to see maybe 25 minutes a game. This guy could jump up to getting 30 fantasy points per game. He's also only in his second year. He's only 23 years old, I think. So eventually he's going to have an opportunity where he'll have a much bigger role. And I think based on the small sample size we've seen so far last year and this season so far, he's a guy that could turn out to be a decent, if not maybe cusp of top 50 fantasy players in a few seasons. So again, he's a guy that can contribute minorly right now, but he's much more of I have an opening on my roster where I don't know what to do. I have some old fart on my team. Let me drop that old fart. Let me pick up Obi Toppin.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, honestly, one thing I'll give you in terms of information on Obi Toppin, he was the leading rebounder and I think the third leading scorer in Summer League this year, which is honestly, if you look across like historical Summer Leagues, the guys who lead Summer League in statistical categories and play significant minutes in significant games, like the names at the top of that list are very impressive. We're talking like Donovan Mitchell, Kawhi Leonard, like we're talking
Jonathan
about
Simmons.
Fred VanVleet.
We're talking, Fred VanVleet. Like we're talking about dudes who, yes, Jonathan Simmons, guys that who legitimately became
Derek
stars.
White.
Now, I don't think
who might be available.
I don't think Obi Toppin is going to be leading the league or anything, but he's, again, in the term of measurables, he's a big dude. He's super athletic if you watch him play. He's got big hands.
He's in the dunk competition, right?
He almost won the dunk competition. So
well, he was there.
He did.
Nobody really wins those these days. It's just who doesn't lose.
It's whoever paid off the.
Who's your other guy for waiver wire pickups this week, Dave?
Yeah, and my other guy is also kind of a draft and stash. Jared Vanderbilt. He's a guy who is on Minnesota. He plays the power forward spot, so he's playing alongside Karl Anthony Towns. He's playing, or he's averaging 21 minutes a game. So, like Josh's point earlier, that's a good amount of minutes for a young player. He's only 22 years old, and he's averaging about 21 fantasy points per game. He is another guy who he can get you some points right now. He might have an occasional off night where he'll get single digit fantasy points or maybe low teens. But for the most part, he'll get you mid 20s. He even hits the 30s sometimes, and he's only 22 years old. So as he continues to get older next season after, maybe he turns into a guy who's getting in the 30s in terms of fantasy points per game. So if I were in the position where I needed to drop an old player, then this is a guy that I'd be looking to target.
Yeah, I'll be honest. This is a guy I don't even know. Like,
me neither.
I've not really watched him, but as soon as David mentioned him when we were talking about guys before the pod, you look at him, he checks all the boxes. Like young, getting minutes. Again, there's a theme here, guys. Like young, getting minutes. Like performing and efficient with those minutes. Like if somebody's doing that, they should be on a dynasty roster, right? So like this, I agree. Like I've never watched this guy play 1 minute of basketball. I've watched every other guy on here, and I can tell you in 5 minutes looking at his stats, he should be on a dynasty roster.
Okay. Watch list.
Star.
Yeah. So I think the last guy we want to talk about, and I happen to know there is already a bid in for this guy. So clearly somebody agrees with me. So Isaiah Hartenstein. So this is the backup center for the Los Angeles Clippers. He's 23 years old. He's kind of a spark plug center, kind of in the model of like a Montrezl Harrell type of player. Like he's not an overly large dude. He's not overly athletic.
He's taller though, right?
He is. He's not a small,
like lankier.
Guy. Yeah, he's not a Draymond Green type of center. He's not like a small, like long guy. He's more your traditional center. But he's very much in the vein of Aviga Zubac, who's their starting center. But he just, quite frankly, the dude plays really hard, which, to be quite honest, does translate to fantasy. Like a guy who's out there, like the term that's used when describing players like this is like high motor guys. They're always like putting in effort when they're on the floor. They're more likely to grab rebounds. They're more likely to grab steals and loose balls. They're more likely to get blocks. Like he's just like a really high motor dude who's like always out there churning. Ivica Zubac is kind of I won't call him an injury-prone player, but he's not the new agile, super flexible big who's like kind of injury proof. Those big, slow, lumbering guys tend to be injured a lot over their career.
Okay, Jonas Valanciunas.
Yeah,
who used to be injured a lot.
And I expect Isaiah. I mean, again, in the vein of what we talked about thus far, he's young. He's 23. He's getting minutes on a good team. He's efficient with those minutes, and he definitely should be on a roster over. I don't know. I'm not going to name anybody individually, but like Thad Young shouldn't be on an NBA roster, a dynasty roster.
Could that be a player that we mentioned earlier?
Yeah, Derek Favors should not be on a dynasty roster probably at this
point. The reason you lost to me, Clay, last week is because you didn't drop Derek Favors.
I'll say now David,
Clay, one of our top Patreon supporters. We love you, Clay.
So David has now used the podcast to proffer for trades, and Josh is just using it to talk trash to his opponents.
Not bad. On Isaiah Hartenstein, I actually, full disclosure, I had him on my watch list as well. I think he could see an even bigger role going forward potentially because of, you mentioned earlier, the starting center on the Clippers. Zubats, yeah.
Zubats.
I think he probably has the least secure position on that team. So it could definitely come down to being a minute share between him and Isaiah Hartenstein as the season progresses, meaning more minutes for the guy on the waiver wire, and more minutes equals more stats that are for your fantasy team.
Yeah.
I don't know if you called it out or not, but he's also pretty young.
He is.
Yeah. What is he? 23.
Josh.
Yeah, David actually pointed out a good point.
Of course.
But it's all speculation is the only thing. Is we don't know
big brain numbers, Josh.
We don't know
something you'll never understand.
Zubats. We don't know what is going to happen with Zubats. Currently, he is biting for that more minutes than Hardenstein is. Hardenstein literally only got 11 minutes. I think 12 or something. He's putting up okay numbers for getting that little minutes, but if you don't get consistent minutes, you just don't have anything. So I wouldn't put him on my watch list just yet. I'd say that if you have enough room to stash somebody, yes, but he's not somebody that I'm starting over anybody else. He's not somebody that I'm excited about. I feel like all the other guys that we've talked about tonight.
He's got an ugly haircut.
And I mean, what is with that name?
Josh, just Google this guy. Look at his profile pic. Like, this guy is. He's not getting the ladies.
He is definitely no Josh Giddey. Tune into our other episodes to see what that joke is about.
Thank you
for how Josh really feels about Josh Giddey.
That was beautiful cross promotion synergy
and those luscious locks.
Thank you for that, guys. I will say, Josh actually makes a really good point, which is out of all the guys we talked about, I'm way higher on Obi Toppin or JaVale McGee or Denny Aviga than I am Hardenstein. I think Hardenstein is an okay option if you're looking for a potential, like, if everybody else gets picked up and it's Monday and you need to drop an old dude and you need to pick up a young guy, Hardenstein's a good option. But I think the other guys we listed, frankly, are better options than him.
And quick note for you actual old dudes that watch this podcast. And I'm talking like, anything above 45.
30.
You're
I was going to say above 30, like all of us are the old guys. That
I was going to say 30 that I remembered. That's me. Better change it. All you actual old guys in real life, when we say old guy on your roster, that means 33 and above. If you're over 33, you are old. And I don't care if they're under half your age. They're old in fantasy basketball.
From here on out, we're gonna call them 15-year-old dogs. Let's just do that. That's a thing that we're gonna call them. That way people know.
And if you're right there on the cusp, say mid 60s, and you're watching this podcast, if you can take a player and double their age and that number is higher than your age, drop them. They're too old.
It's a good rule of thumb.
So now, no animal lovers, no Israelis, no Palestinians, And no one over 60. Well, no one over 40 will listen to this podcast.
Hey.
So
but tell your friends about this podcast. Those that are preferably under 65. We like to keep it lively here.
Who else can we offend?
I
feel like we're already about in 1,000.
In that vein, I'm going to close it down. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next week.